Growth, growth, growth. Liz Truss's mantra in her first speech before her own Conservative Party since taking over, in a bid to rebound after a disastrous early climb down over tax cuts for the rich. The new UK Prime Minister trying to change the conversation.
After a tempestuous couple of weeks in which her government's mini-budget sent the pound into freefall, Liz Truss was in need of a pick-me-up, and her speech to the Conservative Party conference hit all the right notes with her audience.
I have three priorities for our economy: growth, growth and growth.
The theme of growth was practically a mantra in what was a shorter than usual leader's speech. Truss admitted the now shelved tax cuts for high earners had become a distraction, but she promised a new era of prosperity for the UK, free from the oversight of the European Union.
We're building an economy which makes the most of the huge opportunities Brexit offers. By the end of the year, all EU red tape will be consigned to history.
But the proposed bonfire of regulations might not be as popular outside the Tory party, as evidenced by a brief protest by environmental activists who accused Truss of betraying her own party's election manifesto. The leader vaunted her government's attempts to deal with the energy crisis and said becoming energy secure was essential for facing new geopolitical challenges.
We became complacent. We didn't spend enough on defence. We became too dependent on authoritarian regimes for cheap goods and cheap energy. And we did not stand up to Russia early enough. We will make sure this never happens again.
With its talk of future success and low taxes, the speech was encouragingly received for the embattled Prime Minister. But as the Tories trail Labour in the polls by a massive margin, Liz Truss may need more than fine words to win over her party in the long run.
Well, for more, let's cross to London. Tim Bale is Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
No problem.
The British Prime Minister, let's face it, had a low bar to clear after some disastrous media appearances in the past week. How did she do, though?
Well, she certainly went down in the hall, but in some ways that is to be expected. The Conservative Party conference is always a rally for the leader, and it was clear even before she spoke that they were determined to give her a fair wind. I think the question is whether she convinced people outside the hall, in particular the electorate sitting at home watching clips on the news, that she'd actually made much of a difference. One speech is never going to solve everything, and I'm not sure this one solved anything.
You had those protesters, we're looking at those images, in fact, right now there in the hall, and she rued what she called the anti-growth coalition. How much is that message going to resonate with the public beyond that hall in Birmingham?
I'm not sure that it will. It seems to me that it's just the latest entry on a long list of enemies of the people that the Conservatives have been trying to whip up, if you like, since 2016. We've had the Liberal elite, the Ramona elite, the BBC, any number of enemies that are supposedly stopping the government doing what it wants to do. I'm really not sure that people are persuaded that there is a bunch of people going around the country trying to prevent economic growth. Indeed, the irony is, if there is going to be opposition, for example, to her planning reforms, it will almost certainly come from her own MPs who are sitting in rural or suburban constituencies and want to prevent too many houses being built.
Tim, stay with us because I want to cross over to our correspondent, Bénédicte Paviot. Bénédicte, when we're looking at the reaction to this speech, well, one came from the markets with the pound down.
Well, I would say actually that, it's down, or it's quite a muted reaction. It hasn't changed very much. I think that maybe they're going to digest it. But look, I think that unsurprisingly, this speech has gone very well down at the Tory conference. I mean, that's not exactly super surprising. She is addressing an audience that agree with growth, smaller state, and lower taxes. what is going to be absolutely crucial is how the markets react internationally, how the market maybe reacts at opening, for example, in the Asian markets tomorrow morning. And particularly, one of the key tests will be what happens when Parliament sits again, is back from recess next Monday. Because are these rebellious MPs, including within her own cabinet, going to try and get Liz Truss to do more U-turns, like the one that we saw on Monday? On Monday, it was about the 45 pence higher income tax rate. On Tuesday, it was about the fact that certain MPs and including some ministers started freelancing instead of holding to the government line, that there was no decision yet on whether to increase welfare benefits in line with inflation, but instead possibly with earnings. That would be a difference between inflation that is almost at 10%, just beneath 10%, and the offers that are on the table of 4 or 5%. Let's remember that we've got another national rail strike, where we've got very few trains running in the United Kingdom today. The nth one, we've had them since July. So we've had them in July, August, September, we're now in October, and they're set to continue. We've got postal strikes. We've got looming nurse strikes. People are really worried about how they're going to pay their bills. And the fact that the markets were so spooked and that the pound has taken a battering and it took an intervention, a major intervention of the Bank of England, isn't going to reassure anybody right now. So, and when you look at British political correspondents, how they've been reacting, Francois, Robert Shrimsley from the Financial Times said the PM gave a confident performance after a torrid week, which may put some heart into her allies, but it changes nothing. As for the Guardian's Pippa Crerar, she has tweeted that Liz Truss said she was working flat out to ensure people get through the economic crisis, but made, quote, no mention of the fact her government's minister budget, mini budget, made things worse. So I wouldn't say that's a super positive reaction, certainly from the media. So it ain't over, and there is no doubt that this Tory conference, which should have been, if not a coronation, a celebration or a big welcome and support to the Tory leader as she launches into, and maybe celebrates or not, 1 month in office, she's got a mini mutiny on her hands, and she's got people who may be pushing her around to change more policy.
All right, well, Tim Bale, lots to unpack there. I guess there's one essential question. Can Britain's new prime minister regain control of her own party?
Well, it is going to be difficult, as your correspondent was saying. There are some major arguments going on within the Conservative Party about this particular package. MPs are looking at the opinion polls, which are suggesting that the Conservative Party is at least 25 percentage points behind the Labour opposition. They're also showing that Labour has moved into a very big lead when it comes to being able to deal with the most important issues facing the country. So I think those Conservative MPs will be looking at those polls and wondering really whether they've, or indeed their members perhaps, have made the wrong decision. They're already talking about the possibility of getting rid of Liz Truss. There is even a question as to whether she can last this month, let alone till the next election. The problem, of course, is how they will actually manage to do that. Under the current rules, it's going to be very difficult, but of course those rules can be changed quite easily. The problem really for the Conservative Party and its MPs is that if they decide to hold a full-blown leadership contest after voting no confidence, for example, in Liz Truss, that would involve the members, and who would the members pick? So there might be a move to try and short-circuit the process and come up with some kind of coronation for a successor. On the other hand, there are some MPs who say this is early turbulence. They should allow Liz Truss to play herself in, give her a few months at least before they make that decision. But the fact that they're already talking within 3 or 4 weeks of her taking over of needing to ditch her really does speak volumes.
Yeah, because what you're suggesting would be a stupendous comeback if she were able to hang on. Do you sincerely believe in your inner gut that she can remain prime minister till then when the next election's scheduled in 2024?
No, I find it very difficult to believe that any party can actually come back from such a huge deficit. I mean, clearly we have seen midterm blues before, but nothing of this sort. And we really haven't seen a party's reputation crater quite so quickly under a new prime minister. She's never really been a great communicator. She is quite an ideologue, and I don't think that sits that well with the electorate. And to be honest, the mistakes that she and her chancellor have made suggest that there's a competence issue as well. So it would be, I think, a surprise if she were to lead the party into the next election. She might make it into next year, but beyond that, and particularly, for example, beyond a big set of local elections in May, I think is quite doubtful.
And you heard our correspondent Bénédicte Paviot talking about one of the things that she professed there is a smaller state. Now, is that what the Conservative Party was elected on back in 2019? Does she have a mandate for that?
No, and I think this is one of the problems. And in fact, the people who disrupted her speech unfurled a little banner that said, who voted for this? And I think a lot of the British electorate is thinking the same. If you look back at the 2019 manifesto, it was about getting Brexit done in order to spend more on public services like health, education and policing. If the Conservatives are now suggesting that they will have to cut or at least hold down spending, that really is not what people voted for. And particularly, it's not what people in the so-called red wall, these more working class voters in the north of England and in the Midlands voted for. So I think the electoral coalition that Boris Johnson put together will be blown apart by those kinds of policies.
Tim Bale, many thanks for joining us from London. Thanks as well to correspondent Bénédicte Paviot.